Who's that coming down the track?
Who's that coming down the track?
It's a mean machine in red and black.
Green machine in red and black.
Ain't nothing finer in the land.
Ain't nothing finer in the land.
Them drunk obnoxious Georgia fans.
Red rock obnoxious Georgia fans.
Go, go!
What's up, y'all? This is John and Mike back for another episode of the Nothing Finer podcast. We've got on Caleb Calhoun from Off the Hook Sports this time to talk about the upcoming night game against Tennessee Volunteers in Sanford Stadium. But before we get all that, how have y'all been and what are you drinking?
I'm good, man. We just came back from our middle school football championship. Our school won 36-0, so shout out to us. 36-6, my
Y'all
bad.
are good at?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not softball or baseball. Actually, I was wrong. It was 36-6. We gave up the first points of the season with 52 seconds left. So that was tough.
How about you, Caleb?
I am good too. I am looking forward to the day that my son is in middle school. I have a 5-month-old right now. Picked him up earlier. It's everyone says it's the most fun stage, and for me, it's my first. So I'm like, I don't know. It seems like the most stressful stage, but maybe it changes over time.
There's definitely pros and cons to every age. You said he was 5 months?
Yeah, he's 5 months.
Oh yeah, man. Once they start moving, it's a whole nother ball game.
Oh, I know. He's kind of started scooting already, and I'm like, oh crap, I gotta leave the door closed and just random stuff like that.
Yeah, when he starts having opinions, then that's even another ball game.
Oh, I'm sure his opinions will be all my opinions. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no issues, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You already get into the game. It's already been exciting. There's already a potential sit out on the Tennessee side from an injury. We'll get into all that, but we're still days out and the stories are still going. All right, so getting into Tennessee, from an outside perspective, Tennessee has had a confusing season with how hot they started offensively, to then struggle against a number of teams, but then beat Alabama. So starting up front with the offensive line, they allowed 18 total sacks, averaging 2 per game, while simultaneously having the ninth-ranked rushing offense. Is the line struggling, or are the sacks a different issue?
It is. The sacks are actually a different issue because the line is in two parts. So to back up for a minute on this, what a lot of people from the outside assume about Josh Heupel's offense because of the tempo and everything they saw with 2022 and Hendon Hooker, they assume it's a finesse offense that throws it all over the field. That's actually not true. It's a vertical. The meat and potatoes of this offense is a vertical rushing attack. I don't even mean stretch runs where you run, on the where you run on the B gap. Okay, I'm talking about just straight between the guard and the center, to make plays. Now, the interior of Tennessee's line, I would not, if I'm Tennessee, I would not trade that for any interior offensive line in the SEC. Cooper Mays at center, Javonte Spraggins, and when healthy, Andre Carrick have all just been superb. The issue has been specifically at tackle. Tennessee moved John Campbell Jr. over to right tackle at the beginning of the year, and John Campbell Jr. battled some injuries and also struggled learning the position. And they opened up the NIL checkbook to get Lance Hurd out of LSU, who, again, couldn't win the starting job over Will Campbell at LSU. But people thought, oh, that's only because of how good Will Campbell was. Lance Hurd is still pretty good. So there was the assumption that he would be great and just be plugged in for Tennessee at left tackle. Didn't actually happen that way. But again, Lance Hurd had been dealing with a sprained ankle for the first few weeks of the season. And so Nico was getting wrecked consistently from really it started, we'll say it started with NC State, but it didn't really expose itself as a concern until Oklahoma. And then it cost the Vols against Arkansas. And then they struggled again against Florida. But they really kind of started to get better after that. And then they played well enough coming together against Alabama. The bye happened, and coming off the bye, I got to say that Lance Hurd and John Campbell Jr. have been significantly better. The issues are not what they were earlier in the season. So it is a different issue. It's specifically a tackle issue, but it's a combination of new tackles at positions and the tackles both battling injuries throughout this year.
All right, so while we're on the subject of the running game, Dylan Sampson's the top 2 running back in college football, and while we think it's a legitimate debate with Genty at Boise, but can you elaborate on the impact he's had on the team this year?
He's been incredible. I'm eating a lot of crow on my podcast, guys. I said Dylan Sampson could not be a feature back. I watched him for 2 years. My assessment of him until this year was Alvin Kamara without the blocking, without the pass pro ability. Just a little too finesse to be exactly like Kamara. I was wrong. He can handle 20, 25, 30 carries a game. And what's really been interesting about Dylan Sampson has been the fact that he's a second half back, which again, when you think of a second half back, you think of like the Derrick Henrys of the world or the Eddie Georges back in the day where, okay, first half, they'll get 2.5, 3 yards a carry. But by the time the fourth quarter comes, they will wear you down. And then that's when they rip off their big gains. Dylan Sampson's not built like that. I mean, he came across, again, as an all-purpose back. But Tennessee's best quarter this year offensively has been the third quarter. And Dylan Sampson had a period, I think it was like 4 straight weeks where he scored 2 touchdowns every single third quarter. And it's one of the craziest things that I've ever seen from a Tennessee running back. Dylan Sampson has done an incredible job of being physical, wearing people down. As I mentioned earlier, he's had a lot of help running behind that interior offensive line, which again is second to none in the SEC. But he himself has been willing to shoulder a much larger burden. And in pass pro, I mean, that was my criticism of him. But when the tackles were struggling earlier in the year, he was the one picking up a lot of the missed blocks by Lance Hurd on the left side. So Dylan Sampson is a total complete back. I will say that I think he has had help with the line. And the other reason why he's had help, guys, is Josh Heupel. There's been kind of I don't want to say the book is out on him or like he's been figured out, but kind of the known thing in coaching circles now is if you run a 3-3-5 base defense or a 3-2-6, which is actually more common now, you can slow down the passing attack that he wants so desperately, and he gets a little impatient. And that actually has opened up a lot more running lanes for Dylan Sampson than other running backs have had in years past. And to his credit, he's taken advantage of it. But teams have really been committed to that 3-3-5. It actually started, I don't know if you guys know this, last year when Tennessee played Austin Peay. And they actually struggled to beat Austin Peay. It was an ugly game. Everybody thought Joe Milton was the issue. Well, Austin Peay threw a 3-3-5 that they hadn't seen. Eli Drinkwitz threw it at them last year, later in the year, where Missouri blew out Tennessee. And then, Arkansas threw it at them this year when they weren't prepared for it, which is how Arkansas beat them. So that's been an issue. But Dylan Sampson, obviously, if you're a running back who can handle the vertical rushing game and you're extremely athletic, so you can make guys in the secondary and in the back seven in general miss, it really benefits you as a player.
So the passing game has struggled a little bit after SEC play started. So they are averaging 202.3 yards per game in conference play. But with only 2 of those games being over 200 passing yards, is that a wide receiver issue, a quarterback issue, or is the scheme to just feed Dylan Sampson until someone can stop him?
It's all of the above, so it's a domino effect. So let's to establish how this started. I mentioned the 3-3-5 issue. Josh Heupel's willing to be and have a vertical rushing attack, so he's going to willingly run the ball with Dylan Sampson until defenses start to cheat up. So let's back up on how this started. When the passing plays were there, the tackles were struggling, like we talked about earlier in the year. As you guys have mentioned, they gave up 18 sacks. Lance Hurd and John Campbell Jr. were both severely struggling. There were some major issues there. That, in turn, wrecked Nico Iamaleava's confidence for a little while. And I mean, guys, it was wrecked. He was getting rid of the ball way too quickly. He was hesitant on when to run, hesitant on who to throw to, wasn't going through his progressions. There was a period in the Arkansas drive, the final drive, when Tennessee could have won the game. There was a snap that he bobbled, and it was a perfect snap, and I think he was just nervous. And then as you guys, I'm sure, have seen the story, he ran out of bounds on the final play. So the tackles messing up resulted in Nico getting hit a lot. Nico getting hit a lot rattled Nico. And then recently, I will say Nico has kind of settled down a little bit. But in the process of settling down, the receivers are now not in sync. The Kentucky game, the receivers were Nico actually threw the equivalent of 350 yards, but there were two bad drops. A receiver who broke off his route when he shouldn't have, and I think part of this is to defend the receivers. I think they've been out of such rhythm because nobody's been able to get them the ball. It's hard to just snap your finger and get it going. So I think this goes back to the tackle injuries, then to Nico being rattled, then to the receivers not being in a rhythm, which is why they've been making mistakes. That's been the main crux of the passing game. But you guys are right. It's also just running the ball with Dylan Sampson has been successful. And on the other side, we're probably going to talk about this, but Tennessee's defense is so good that, look, I think that Josh Heupel's making the calculation in many situations. It just hasn't been worth it to try to carry it out yet. They really haven't had to, although they could have used it, obviously, against Arkansas.
We got to hit on the play of and potential injury of Nico, completing 65.2% of his passes this season. But similarly to the yards aspect of the passing game, he went from 70.2% completion to 61.9 in SEC play. His yards per attempt has also dropped from 10.4 to 8.3. You have an explanation of the drop-off in passing efficiency?
Yeah, it's the combination. It's the combination of the other things. It's the fact that the tackles were missing blocks earlier. He also, I think, has like 5 turnovers that are not interceptions, so 5 fumbles. But it's the constantly getting hit combined with the his confidence then getting wrecked in the middle of the season, combined then with the receivers getting knocked out of rhythm. All those things together kind of coincided. Also combined with again, back to the 3-3-5 that they're playing, defenses have pretty much made a commitment since Hendon Hooker did what he did 2 years ago to, just took the SEC by storm with Josh Heupel. There's been a commitment of defenses saying we don't want teams beating us over the top. So look, the plays, while you guys, I'm sure, remember, I mean, Jalen Hyatt would be just wide open, bare down the sideline. And, Velus Jones before that, Cedric Tillman. There were usually about 9 or 10 of those opportunities a game. And where there were once 9 or 10, there's probably 3 to 4 to hit now. And so, it's much, you got to be much more efficient when they are there. But again, it has opened up the running game even more than it did 2 years ago.
Going over to the defensive side of the ball, they've been just flat out elite this season. 5th in total defense, 9th in rushing defense, 15th in passing yards allowed, tied for 33rd in sacks with 22 on the season, and 7th in tackles for loss with 71 so far. What do you attribute as the biggest change from a few years ago when the defense was a liability?
So one thing that hasn't changed, and I'm actually going to start with something that hasn't changed, has been the defensive line. The depth there has been a strength. Now, the issues were twofold. Linebackers, there was no depth at linebacker for a while. And the other issue is the secondary was just bad. And I mean bad. Okay, so there was, let's start with the linebackers. Last year, so 2 years ago, Tennessee had Jeremy Banks, who was a locker room issue, and they had Aaron Beasley. Aaron Beasley was not versatile enough to play at an SEC level, and Jeremy Banks was not fast enough to play in coverage, which is kind of crucial for your Mike linebacker, and he couldn't do it. Then you go to the secondary. Secondary just had a lot of issues across the board. They had no lockdown corners. They had safeties that at a different level, you probably could have seen them play effective, but just not at the SEC level. Okay, so then last year, they kind of shored things up, but Keenan Peele, their star linebacker, suffers a season-ending injury in the opener against Virginia. Tennessee has no depth at linebacker. Elijah Herring comes in, and he's just too slow for lateral quickness. So this year comes along. Arian Carter steps into that role. Keenan Peele's back healthy. Significant upgrade at linebacker. The secondary, there was a massive overhaul in the transfer portal this year, guys. I mean, I think there were 7 defensive backs who left. Tennessee's got basically a brand new secondary made up of freshmen and elite transfers. So the standout among the elite transfers is Jamad McCoy. He's a lockdown cornerback who I think may be the best cornerback in the SEC. He shuts off one whole side of the field. The other part of the secondary, Ricky Gibson III, is a very good number 2 cornerback. He's developed in the system, and he was recruited by Tim Banks, and he's being developed by him now as a sophomore. So he's a strength. Will Brooks has really stepped up as a walk-on at safety. I think Will Brooks is the type of safety that probably wouldn't be great on a lot of teams in the SEC, including Tennessee last year. But when you have an elite lockdown cornerback like Jermon McCoy, who can take away one side of the field, a safety that may not be the most athletic but can stay in position and is smart, can be effective in that situation. And that's what Will Brooks is. And then there's a rising star. He was a crown jewel of Tennessee's recruiting class this past year, Boo Carter, who is now starting at nickel. And he is everybody's favorite player. He plays hard. He plays tough. He's always around the ball, extremely athletic. So, I mean, the secondary has done a 180. They are, but the biggest part of all of that, of everybody I named, the story is Jermon McCoy. Jermon McCoy was a transfer from Oregon State. He was a freshman All-American last year. Tennessee hasn't had a lockdown corner. And you're kind of seeing with Tennessee how much the other players in the secondary the past few years were actually decent, but you're seeing now how much better they can be when there's a lockdown corner who can take away one side of the field, and that's what Jermon McCoy is.
The front seven's one of the best in the country, but has shown the ability to get gashed. The guys like Montrell Johnson having 7.1 yards per carry and Devon Booth having 125 yards on 20 carries last week. Can the D-line maintain the elite level of play late into the season?
I think they can. The Montrell Johnson thing, that was a little bit of, there were a lot of factors that went into that. Tennessee was not being able to control the clock the way they would want to. Now, Heupel used to not care about controlling the clock, but this year they kind of need to because of their passing game issues and how good their defense is. They couldn't do it that game. That was one of the worst games for the offense. And I think with Devon Booth, a couple of things happen. Look, Mississippi State's offense has been what I was going to say was that I think that was a situation where, Mississippi State's offense has been coming together recently, and that was kind of a situation where, look, you're going to see this a lot more in night games if you're a defensive line built guys. The SEC teams built around the defensive line are going to have off nights because playing defensive line is all about playing with your hair on fire. And I mean, like, you have to go into the game wanting to play with your hair on fire. As kind of November wanes on and you play these night games, a lot of them, you're watching games all day, figuring out, where your college football playoff situation is, where you are in the standings. It can kind of be hard to emotionally get yourself ready to play the type of game you need to play as a defensive lineman at night when that happens. I think that's actually what happened with Devon Booth last week with Mississippi State. But I do think overall still the front seven is fine. What they give up in yards sometimes on the ground rushing, they make up for in sacks and pressures, and it's just and also the ability they can go deep in the fourth quarter. It's kind of interesting. They might be the first front four I've ever seen that gives up fewer yards in the fourth quarter than they give up in the first quarter. I don't know if that's true. I'm just guessing. I'm just throwing it out there. But they go. You guys will be shocked to know this. I think there was one game where 14 players played at least 10 plays on the defensive line. I mean, it's just an insane stat when you think about it.
So the secondary has been mostly great, but have given up some yards against better passing attacks like Arkansas and Alabama. And other than just Carson Beck throwing them the football, what do they need to do to keep the Georgia passing game at bay?
I mean, banking on Carson Beck throwing you the football is a pretty good bet recently, isn't it?
Yeah, it would not be the underdog this year. That it'd be a heavy favorite if you could bet on it.
Yeah, I had a joke that I said Carson Beck. So just so you guys know, I'm a Titans fan, and what you're really seeing with Will Levis, that's what Carson Beck is right now at Georgia. It feels like, which is a quarterback who he takes Brett Favre risk without the Brett Favre arm talent. If that makes sense.
Yeah, he's the Oprah of college football right now. Everybody gets a football.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I love that one. I might steal that tomorrow for the show, but I'll cite you guys. I promise. Yeah, I think, I actually don't. So with Alabama, it's a little bit different. I don't think the secondary struggled against Alabama. What they really did against Alabama, if you watched, was they used their edge rushers to keep Jalen Miller in the pocket And they banked on the fact that on serious throws needed to be made, that Jalen Miller wouldn't be able to make them. And that was a pretty good bet, honestly. They stayed in zone most of the game and it worked. The Arkansas game, it was I think there were some momentum changers that happened late. They were on the field way too much, so that was the issue there. As far as Georgia, I mean, the truth is not just having Carson Beck get them the ball, but rattling Carson Beck. And I mean, you hate to go here, but knocking him to the sideline a couple of times. I'm not saying try to hurt somebody, not Saints bounding gate, but I don't know if you guys know this. Only one quarterback all year has finished the game against Tennessee. I mean, they are hitting quarterbacks so much up front that, I mean, they're wrecking players. I think Jalen Moore was the only one who actually finished the game. Tennessee has, so it's really about the pressure they're getting up front. I think the biggest thing they have to do is the nickel and the safeties have to stay in position. You guys may know Georgia a little bit more than I do, so I might defer to you on this, but I don't feel like Georgia has a receiver that dictates coverage on the outside right now. And
nope, you're correct. You're correct there.
Yeah.
And even if they did, Georgia leads the country in wide receiver drops, so it wouldn't matter much.
Okay, so yeah, there you go. Yeah, so I would normally say Jamal McCoy is key, but because they don't have a receiver who dictates coverage, I think the real key is for the safeties. And so Will Brooks, Andre Turrentine, and Boo Carter are the guys I'm talking about. If they stay in position over the middle of the field, I think that's the biggest key to this game. And again, it should even be easier then, because I mean, the other thing you're seeing is, forget just receivers on the outside. I mean, Georgia's banged up all over. They don't have a tight end like Brock Bowers who dictates coverage either anymore. So I think the biggest thing is for the nickel and the safeties to stay at home in this game.
Who's one player that we need to know about on the defense?
The obvious one is James Pierce. I mean, James Pierce is a superstar. He's dictated how offensive linemen blocking schemes have gone this year, and you kind of feel for him because you see this all the time. It reminds me of Jadeveon Clowney back in 2013, which is why I've always said defensive ends guys should never, ever, ever push a Heisman campaign for themselves, because it's so easy to neutralize them. He's having the same impact where he's not getting his stats because teams are just avoiding him or putting an extra blocker out there, but he's blowing up plays constantly. So that's the obvious one. Another one that I think is going to be key in this game, funny enough, if you're a Georgia fan, the guy you got to worry about the most is Omar Norman-Lyon. He's an interior defensive lineman. He's the best I'm not going to say he's the best defensive tackle for Tennessee, but he's the best pass rusher for the defensive tackles, and he's the best at getting into the backfield a lot of times. And I know Georgia's been wrecked at guard this year. And because of that, I feel like Omar Norman-Lott's the guy that they need to figure out how to contain as much as possible. I assume Tate Ratledge is playing, right, this week?
It is difficult to know before the availability report comes out. He did leave the game last week after having ankle surgery earlier this year, and he played in half of the two games before Ole Miss. He only played in the second half of Florida, and then he left in the second half of Ole Miss. So he's played, one game since the Alabama game. Because he had surgery on his ankle. It'll probably be a game time decision on him.
Okay. All right. So yeah, with that, I would say that Omar Norman-Lott's the guy that to be the unsung star that people don't know about on Tennessee's defense in this game.
And who is one non-Dylan Sampson player that we need to know about on offense?
I assume I have to say a non-Nico too, right?
Well, that's something that I wanted to ask you at the end of kind of what we have here is about his situation.
Okay. So the non-Dylan Sampson weapon, I'd probably go Dante Thornton. Tennessee, he's been probably Tennessee's best elite playmaker at receiver. The receivers really showed themselves to kind of put it together last week. Tennessee's best when they do a few things. Brew McCoy is the guy they want to get the ball repetitively on the outside. He's a physical receiver who can dictate coverage. He's not the fastest guy, but he'll shed some tackles and he'll just be kind of a frustrating force to guard. Very similar to a former Tennessee receiver. And I'm not just saying this to trigger Georgia fans from the last time Tennessee beat them, but he's a Jawan Jennings type. And
last year when we were talking to Dave, I said he reminds me a lot of Mike Evans.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, So yeah, Brew McCoy is the guy that they want to watch out for. Then Squirrel White is obviously the slot guy, the speedster. He's finally getting healthy. But when those two things happen, when Squirrel White is affecting coverage and as a slot guy who's athletic, and Brew McCoy is shedding tackles left and right, that really leaves Dante Thornton in one-on-one coverage on the outside on the other side. And Dante Thornton is he's that type of receiver that you just send him on vertical go routes constantly and see if he can make a play. The best, Dave always brings up this great comparison, but the best comparison is Alvin Harper for the Cowboys in the 90s, like where Michael Irvin was getting all the reps and touches and the star that allowed them to just have Alvin Harper one-on-one coverage on vertical routes constantly in the 90s for big plays. I think that's how they want to use Dante Thornton. And in a game like this, that's where they would have the most impact in the passing game is Dante Thornton making those plays. So he'd be the offensive guy.
What are you most concerned about on Saturday?
From Tennessee's perspective?
Yeah.
So I would say the most concerning thing from Tennessee's perspective is obviously Nico Iamaleava's health. That's the biggest one. The other one is just being on the road. Look, Tennessee and Josh Heupel's throughout Josh Heupel's tenure has struggled on the road. Now it's better this year, I think, because truth of the matter is defense travels. Offenses don't always travel, and that may be the reason. But you guys probably remember 2 years ago after Tennessee decided to, chirp and, talk a lot of smack about Sanford Stadium being loud or not being loud. They got humiliated because they couldn't get a snap off against that crowd. And quite honestly, Georgia won that game 27-13. Anybody who watched that game thought that game Georgia could have won 45-6 if they really wanted to.
What are you most confident in? Oh, Mike, go ahead.
No, I said you were part of that crowd, and I'm gonna give you some credit for that win.
Yeah, I am lucky that it was cold, and I had a couple of flasks in my boots because it was cold and raining, and without the liquor, I would not have been near as loud.
So what you're saying is the Georgia fans got loud with the help of the liquid courage.
No, just me. I am a self-proclaimed little bitch in the cold. I hate it. There's a reason I live in Savannah. If it gets below 50, I'm in a bad mood. And then you add rain and cold, I'm not a fan of that.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm from Memphis. I went to college in the DC area, though, funny enough. So you guys asked, what was the last question that was asked?
What are you most confident in on Saturday?
Okay, so from Tennessee's perspective, I'm most confident in the interior defensive line more than anything. I think Georgia's issues on the interior themselves, combined with Carson Beck trying to make plays, is going to create a lot of problems for Carson Beck in the backfield. So I'm confident in Tennessee's ability to rattle Carson Beck.
And then last question, we don't have it in the outline because it's just kind of developed throughout the week, but with Nico, what's his situation? What are you hearing in town up there?
Okay, so here's what we've heard. And by the way, this comes out just as we're talking. Nico Iamaleava has been listed as questionable for Georgia on Saturday.
Okay.
Could be total gamesmanship. Could be complete gamesmanship by Josh Heupel. Heupel comes out on Sunday, he comes out on Saturday after the game. Comes out on Monday. In both instances says we expect Nico back, says Nico is out of practice, but then hints like, but Gaston Moore took some first team reps, but then it kind of implied like, but that's what he always does, so no big deal. I have a hard time believing that, but that's what he said. Yesterday, Pete Thamel of ESPN comes out and says Nico's in concussion protocol, but he's been out at practice. So they were just waiting on concussion protocol. Chris the Bear Fallica went Fox Sports, formerly of ESPN College Game Day gambling expert, said that his sources had told him that Nico's not going to play. Now, I was actually leaning there, guys, and I'm going to tell you why. Chris Fallica is a Vegas guy. He, his whole stick was built to brand as the best bets on College Game Day for a while. Like his tie-ins are directly to Vegas. Vegas set the line at Georgia by double digits. I have a hard time believing they would have set the line where they set it if they didn't think Nico was at least banged up for this game on Saturday. So I feel like Vegas has some inside info that we don't have. And that's what led me to that. However, Dave on our show today reported that he had a source tell him that Nico was in concussion protocol, but has already passed it. So I'm giving you guys the entire like range of what could be the case here. Gun to my head, Nico plays, but he's hurt and he's not 100%. And it's not because of the concussion, because they wouldn't play him at all because of the concussion. Like if it was questionable, they wouldn't play him for that. I think he also hurt his shoulder in that game. And I think that's the real story that they're not telling right now, is that Nico, it's not the head, it's they don't know if his shoulder. Look, we saw the injury, and in real time, Dave and I both thought he broke his collarbone when he got hurt. Doesn't look like that, but he could have, severely bruised his shoulder or something like that. So that's what it sounds like is the big issue. Is I think I'll just say my guess is that he's questionable because of his shoulder, not because of his head.
And do you pay any attention to boxing or fighting or anything? Random off the wall question.
I do not. I'm sorry. I always wanted to pick it up, but I just feel like I never had the bandwidth to do it.
No, so we do game picks, and I was going to ask Tyson or the YouTube kid. I can't remember his name.
Jake Paul?
Yeah.
My money's on Jake Paul. My money's on Jake Paul on this. I know.
So we can't even be friends on Friday.
But wait, guys, come on now. Like, Mike Tyson is what? Isn't he 60 now?
He's 57. He's still an executioner.
That is true, but okay, Tyson's whole shtick was okay. Just so you guys know, the best I know about fighting, funny enough, being from Memphis. I lived in Memphis when the Mike Tyson Lennox Lewis fight happened in 2002. That was such a big deal. And it was kind of a known thing that Tyson was just done at that point, because Tyson's whole shtick, wasn't it power knocking you out early? I mean, does Tyson have the fighting arts to last that long if he has to?
So the thing about late in his career before he retired is he was on a lot of drugs. And since he started doing these exhibition fights, he's gotten on testosterone therapy because of his age, and he looks to be in the same shape he was when people were taking bets on how many seconds into a fight he was knocking people out. And Jake Paul is not a heavyweight naturally. So how's his gas tank going to be at that weight?
Okay, that's a fair question. I guess I'm just defaulting to age because I don't know fighting as well as I don't know it at all. I'll be honest, but I was just defaulting to age. But yeah, I had always wondered with Tyson, and I mean, maybe I don't know as much, but didn't Tyson fight bums throughout most of his rise to the top?
Pretty much every boxer does.
No, that's true.
Yeah, they just kind of, the way that organizations work is you fight nobodies until you get good enough for a title shot, and then it's like you'll fight one really good guy and then one bum, and then one really good guy and then one bum once you get a title. They set it up to where you can be undefeated because one loss on your boxing record now just looks awful.
So the way WCW branded Goldberg in wrestling.
Probably. I'm not much of a wrestling guy.
Yeah, no, that's exactly how it would be.
Okay. I did watch wrestling for a while. Funny enough, Goldberg played for Georgia.
He did. Went into the Georgia-Florida Hall of Fame 2 weeks ago.
Oh, really?
He did.
Interesting. But yeah, that's so yeah, then in the 90s when WCW needed a shot in the arm, they had Goldberg win all these matches in like 2 minutes and branded him, as the most unstoppable force. But you're right, the problem with an unstoppable force in wrestling is once they lose, their entire brand is done.
Right.
So you can't go any further from that. So yeah, that's what they did there.
All right. Are you ready to pick some games?
Let's do it. Let's roll.
All right. So we give you the spread and the over-under, but we're just asking for a straight-up pick. And I am going to read the lines off of my phone because they've almost all moved. So starting off, Texas going to Fayetteville to play Arkansas. They are 13.5-point favorites, over under 57.5.
So I'm being a little crow because I thought Florida was going to cover against Texas last week. I thought Texas has some deep interior, internal issues, particularly with the Arch Manning, Quinn Ewers thing. but maybe I jumped the gun. But I'm still gonna say Arkansas covers plus 13.5. And I'm gonna take the under. I think the Arkansas crowd will give Texas some issues. I don't think the quarterback play is consistent. And also just an old Southwest Conference rivalry. I mean, I don't know if you guys remember, there were years back during the Houston Matt Jones days. Arkansas upset Texas once, and then they almost beat him a second time. This is at the peak of Texas football with Mac Brown. I just feel like Arkansas, this is the type of game that Arkansas is always going to give hell to.
Next one, LSU playing at Florida, and I'm trying to actually pull up the injury report right now because they came out just a minute. Well, at least some of them came out just a minute ago to see if how he's listed, because I feel like the entire game hinges on if he's playing, and he's questionable. But we got LSU minus 4.5 over under 54.5.
I'm actually gonna even Florida let me down last week, and I'm not taking them again. I'm actually gonna pick LSU to cover in this one. It's not a big game, so Brian Kelly's team will show up. But the other part about that is Florida is banged up, and I'll also add that two other things. Florida's got some internal issues as an athletic program in general right now. I mean, Billy Napier got the dreaded vote of confidence last week, which, as you guys probably know, the minute the athletic director says, "I have total faith in this guy," he's getting fired in a couple of weeks. And the other part is I'll throw in, I don't think LSU's fully out of the playoff race. And I think Brian Kelly may be able to get his kids to understand that, because chaos could still happen with the final 3 weeks.
So, just a little insight on Florida, because we had probably like a 30-minute talk with our Florida guest a couple of weeks ago. According to him, they can't. The University of Florida, it is written in their bylaws, they cannot fire a head coach of a sports team without a president of the university. They currently do not have a president of the university, and will not until May at the earliest. So they don't really have the ability to fire Billy, which is just the best news in the world for everybody else in the SEC.
That is hilarious. They probably can't fire their athletic director then, right? Scott Strickland.
They can't. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. This is great. Oh, that's hilarious.
All right, next game we're talking about, and just, before the season, we all knew this was going to be a ranked matchup in the 20s. Number 23 Missouri playing at number 21 South Carolina. South Carolina's 13.5-point favorites, over under 43.5.
I think home field advantage has been very valuable this year in the SEC. So typically I wouldn't pick South Carolina to cover this spread, but playing at home, I think they will. Missouri, I think we all agree, is the most fraudulent two-loss team. I don't know what's more fraudulent, Missouri at 7-2 or Indiana at 9-0. I mean, I'm trying to figure out which one is more fraudulent.
I would say Missouri, because Missouri has not looked good at any point this season, but Indiana's kicked the shit out of who they've played.
Yeah, they have. That's a good point. You're probably right. So probably, and Indiana is at least 10-0 as opposed to 7. Yeah, so yeah, I'll say Missouri is extremely fraudulent, and Eli Drinkwood's coming out saying SEC teams should get an automatic bid if they're 10-2. No, Missouri shouldn't. Missouri's played the worst schedule of any two-loss team I've ever seen in the SEC. So I got South Carolina beating the brakes off them, and then everybody can rest easy knowing that Missouri's not going to be pesky, trying to force their way in at the end of the year.
And the last game, of course, we're talking Tennessee going to Athens, and just because of the way the last time this game played out and the excuses that your fans had after the game.
A lot.
I just a little bit of a weather report. The weather is a high of 66 in the afternoon, low of 41 overnight, no rain, breeze of about 4 miles per hour. And hopefully, the 0.02 degrees off that Tennessee fans claim the field goal posts were last year is not a factor.
Yeah. By the way, if Georgia wins this game, they'll be 1 game short of matching the 9-game win streak Tennessee had over Georgia in the 90s, which I know, so they're almost at the same level of dominance, which is I don't think in this rivalry, I don't think anybody thought that streak would be matched. That's pretty impressive. I got Georgia. I got Tennessee covering. I don't think they're going to lose by 9. I got the under in this game. I think the under is the best play, honestly. I could honestly see a 15-14 game in this one. But Tennessee fans aren't going to like me saying this on somebody else's show, but I do think Georgia's going to end up winning. I think Georgia's going to end up pulling it out. There's a playoff berth on the line. I think Tennessee would have had a better shot had Georgia beaten Ole Miss last week. But I think Georgia losing to Ole Miss, their backs against the wall. I think Tennessee does. I don't think Georgia's going to let this one slip away.
We appreciate you coming on. I'll give you a second to plug, what you guys got going on over there, because I know y'all do a ton.
Yes, you guys can check out our work on offthehooksports.com. We do a lot of writing covering Tennessee and SEC and college football as a whole. And we are live on YouTube every weekday, Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern. It's a 10 to noon show. We also repurpose our videos after that so you can see what we talked about on our quick hooks. And yeah, we also do live recaps of every Tennessee football game on Saturdays when they happen. Lot of great things happening at Off the Hook, and I started last year general college football history videos that I love doing. That's going to be with the podcast. I'm going to get back into that once the off season hits. So yeah, check us out again, offthehooksports.com and Off the Hook Sports, our YouTube channel. Check out all our work there.
Awesome. We appreciate it. And with how long ago it was, in your history, you can talk about Tennessee's last national championship.
Oh, yeah, 1998. That was the year. Also, not just their last national title, their last SEC title. And guys, when 2003 rolled around, people were like, guys, it's been a little long without an SEC title for Tennessee. And it's they win the first ever BCS national title, and it's all down here from there.
But we appreciate you coming on. I learned a ton. I've got plenty of notes in my phone for us to do our show tomorrow with. But we got some stuff to close up on, so you can get out of here, but we appreciate it.
All right. I would like to point out, since you guys brought up the national title, we have a story on how Ray Goff did not want Jamal Lewis on his team, and that's why Jamal Lewis didn't go to Georgia.
Oh, good God. Oh.
Also, we have a former player who thinks Ray Goff may have been a little bit lit up on the sauce when he was recruiting trying to recruit him in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
There are very few
that's not shocking
you
at all.
say about Ray Goff that would surprise me.
All right, guys. Y'all have a good one.
You too.
See ya.
All right, you appreciate it.
All right, guys. Appreciate Caleb for coming on and talking to us. If you're interested in Tennessee stuff, or like he was talking about general college football history, go check out Off the Hook Sports. I read their stuff quite a bit, and they got a great thing going on over there. Sad they're just Tennessee fans. Kind of is what it is as far as that goes. But when you guys are listening to this tomorrow...
Yeah, we can't all be perfect.
Do what? Do what?
I said we can't all be perfect. Said we can't be all be perfect.
Yeah, that's... I wouldn't call myself that, but no, not even with teams I picked to follow, because Pirates,
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
But when y'all are listening to this, Caleb and I are doing an episode tomorrow. Tonight when you listen to this, tomorrow when you'll be listening to it, breaking down everything. Like I was telling Caleb, I took a bunch of notes on stuff he talked about. So it'll be in depth. It'll be fun. Caleb's already teased that he has some Texas and Arkansas takes. So be sure to check that out. Follow us on social media. Share the show with your friends. Share the show with your enemies. I don't care. Just talk about us, But as always, guys, remember there's nothing finer in the land
Been a drunk, obnoxious Georgia fan.